Another series with Baaghil. This time is going to be a bit different. I invited Yaz again. He was on a previous show because we've discussed in the past 1 week on strategies and how companies are approaching things. So Yaz have introduced himself before. He can introduce himself again. Yaz, go ahead. It's yours.
Hello, my name is Yaz Yazicioglu. I live in Istanbul. I was born and raised in the United States. My background education is primarily consumer psychology, and engineering, avionics, aeronautics engineering. And I use the two to help companies integrate with their end consumers.
Yes, we've seen all sort of exercises where people come in with the digital world. It's easy to have a title. You just have to go on and put your title on and that's it. And people can buy into the idea of the title and not the values, which is very easy because that's your instant experience is that you see the picture looks appealing, you see the title, whether if it's individual or company, either one. So you go, wow, amazing, and then you read through and then you start questioning, you start having doubts. Then you sit back and you make your own analysis and you start doing your own case studies. In my case, I've done with a lot of companies in the Middle East. Why is it easy for people to buy into what seems to be perceived over the values?
I think in many ways it's pretty much us kind of trying to sublimate our own wants and desires, kind of like a bias. So that's many times it is an actual bias, so that we assume that that will be the case because of our own standards. So we impress upon the other brands or the so forth what we expect, and we expect them to adhere to the same. And at the very first moment we see a color, a catchphrase, or something that we, have affinity towards or some sort of connection with, we automatically assume that our standards appeal to them standards as well. And that opens a lot of times the road to disappointment because obviously expectations can be in all gamut range. And when you have a consumer that's educated, automatically they have a certain level of expectation. When you have an uneducated consumer, they have a different level of expectation. And I think in Turkey, primarily, since we have a large, vast, according to me, my thoughts is very many uneducated consumers. So that's why a lot of brands and new coming names, like you just mentioned, can exploit that, by just catching them real quick. But then, of course, down the traveling experience of the consumer, they find out that that's not the case. And that's where the expectations get dropped, disappointment happens, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. When we think about business to business, there's a lot of branding agencies, and let me go back a bit. They're designing agencies, but they transform themselves into branding agencies because they have the idea brand is just about the assets, the logo, how these logos are placed on each touch points and so on. Then when they go to a full-fledged exercise with one of these companies, and then you come to assess the approach, whether if it's the core essence, the positioning, the attributes, anything, you get a shock of your life.
I can appreciate that. Well, you get a shock of your life if you're somebody who knows what to expect and you know what you want delivered from a brand agency when you go in the first place. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things consumer psychologists do, is that we're the unbiased buffer between the brand and the agencies. Because when you go to the agency's going to go, oh, put your brand everywhere. The more the merrier, the more media coverage you get, the more money I make. Well, that might not necessarily be for the benefit of the brand. So as a consumer psychologist, what I do is I go in and I say, okay, look, you don't want to be in mass media because your brand is more of a personalized private brand. It shouldn't be put into the mass media sense in that way. You should approach it from this angle, or you should use these colors or these styles to better give an alignment with what your style is to reach your end consumer. Then with that brief, they go to the agencies or the brand agencies so that they have some parameters to work within rather than falling prey to them, taking them all the way down the road and doing everything else.
How can companies, corporations, whether they're mid-size or small-size even, avoid branding agencies that falsify in their values or on their deliveries even?
First of all, know what your product is. Know your end consumer. Know that if I'm going to reach out to, let's say, 30 to 40 something people with a middle income, and I go to a brand agency and they give me youthful colors and they say, we're going to put you all over social media and, oh no, Facebook's dead. Wait a second, Facebook's my primary 30 to 40 people that are going to be there. These colors, you got to know your customer so that, these kind of brand agencies just don't come walking all over you thinking that they know what they're talking about and just take you down the rabbit hole, like I say. Second of all is always get an unbiased opinion. Somebody who's not making money off the amount of, media that you're going to be spending. Third, and most importantly, is, take control of your brand. When you take control of your brand, I'm not talking about where it's put and where it's not. I'm talking about
understanding the value of the brand.
Yes, exactly. Do an exercise with somebody. Doesn't have to be a professional. It can be just your brainstorm friends or your own teammates or your colleagues to sit down and put those core values down. and to then use those as parameters and benchmarks so that when you do go to a brand agency, you can kind of get a test and feel if they're right for you or not.
Absolutely. Let's go back. So the head of marketing does not understand how brands work or the value of brand. The CEO, in most cases, especially in the Middle East, 90% don't understand what a brand is. They assume it is a trademark, it's a logo and so on, 90%. And we've seen banks and manufacturers and consumer goods go through a whole brand exercise. At the end of the day, 5 years later, nothing happened. It's the same thing. It's just the look and feel changed.
Cosmetics is usually the first thing to be changed because it's the easiest. I mean, this is in psychology a lot of times or neurosis because you have a procrastination behavior of trying to do something big, but you go and you do so little things to get the dopamine levels up because you feel like you did something, but actually it's pointless what you did. So it's the same kind of exercise. In these big companies, they want to feel like they got to do something, so they just do a cosmetic change to the brand. Oh, we did a big thing. Yeah, but no, you didn't. You didn't address the customer. You didn't go down to the root. You didn't actually get that brand to meet, ground zero, patient zero, or customer zero, and then move your way back up. I mean, it's a long-term exercise. It's not something, like that at all.
But what happens, Yaz, if you're a founder of an organization or you're the CEO or chairman of the board and you don't understand your brand?
This is not something that just the CEOs or marketers, this is everybody. And I'm not saying that I'm better or you're better. It's a normal human behavior to take your hat, no pun intended, and put it on when you go to work and say, I'm the CEO. And then when you get out of the CEO and maybe you go home, you have kids, you take that CEO hat off, you put it down, you maybe put the father hat on. You have these various hats. And it's very difficult for anyone, any industry, no matter how well-versed or what schools you graduate, how much you know brand and marketing, et cetera, so that when you're in your job, it's very difficult to take that job hat off and put it on the customer hat. We're all consumers some way or another.
Yeah.
We leave the moment we leave the work and we see some guy on the street selling something, we become a consumer. So we're putting on a consumer hat. It's imperative to take an exercise where you can take off your executive professional hat and put on a customer hat, see from those eyes what your brand represents to them. Not from your own pride and ego or what do you want it to be, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is a simple enough exercise, but I think very rarely done.
How much ego do you think plays around with when you're heading a company or heading a board or you're heading a department?
I'll never give you an example. Turkish Airlines, they just recently went through a new logo. I mean, if you look at it for a brief second, you're like, well, what changed? Nothing, really. Okay, what? They flattened it out, they made it more 2D, they went from the blue writing to a black writing. The font's the same, the logo is pretty much the same. Now, when you want to communicate that, you want to communicate also the reason why.
Yeah, the relevance.
The relevance. Yeah. God knows, I'm pretty much sure that they probably did it for cost-cutting purposes, so that, two-dimensional looks better when it's printed and less cost. Let's not use 3 colors, let's drop down to 2 colors. I mean, when I saw it, I could tell all the variations of why it was done for cost-cutting purposes versus, anything really to, transmit the brand's value.
So I think I have also a perfect example in that. There's an airlines in Saudi Arabia called FlyNAS. It's a hybrid airlines, while the customers, they think it's a low-fare airlines. So you have the management on one end, and then you have the customers on one end. So if the management is one end, what kind of values are you delivering? Only what the management sees. So the customer does not connect to the values of the management. So the world becomes two apart. And where's the problem? It's in the heart of the marketing department.
Sure.
The shift between a hybrid airlines to a low-cost carrier airlines should have been done for ages since they decided to do that. It's been the same way for the past 10 years.
You have to establish the expectation of what your customer is going to have.
I don't understand what the people, when you meet the flight attendants or touch points, customer cares and so on, versus what the airlines claim are two different worlds. And then when you go in and you have a complaint, you get an attitude.
I mean, I think Turkish Airlines is probably one of the worst customer response people I've dealt with them. I think they have absolutely no clue. They do a lot more branding, they do a lot more setting of the expectations, but I think there's a lot of churn. In the very beginning, I think it was fabulous because I think, for me, I'm not trying to evaluate Turkish Airlines, but it's a good example. They started off with a chef in the air. That were the first airlines to put the chef hat walking in the plane. At that point in time, in that day and age, the biggest complaint was food on planes, basically. And it's like, what is this? It's like throw down some kind of, something and you're on an international or transatlantic flight for 8 hours and you're eating biscuits or something. It didn't really fit. So the moment people saw this, they saw luxury. Keep the price the same, keep the experience the same, but throw a little twist on that food. Wow, the expectation of the customer is so much more happier. Yeah. They carried that very well.
See, focus and consistency. Go back to the same question I have about Apple. Steve Jobs is gone. Expectations were built high on innovation.
Yep.
All of a sudden, when Tim Cook took over, innovation has dropped drastically. The expectations has dropped because honestly, the brand core of it is all about innovation. So that core, when it dropped, customer expectation dropped. What evolved? Size, extension, iPhone Max, iPhone X plus 7 plus whatever it is.
The whole line just started becoming confusing.
Exactly.
And people started losing
Absolutely. Here's a question also that comes not only the small timers, also Apple, one of the biggest brands across the globe, exercises the wrong way of approach of things. Having that Steve Jobs created that track and having Tim Cook as a CEO, do you think that was a wrong decision? Because the two do not complement each other on innovation.
If they work together, I think it's fantastic. But if you give one too much power, too much autonomy, then yeah, obviously the scales get tipped one way or the other.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I mean, we've seen this in many different ways. You and I had this discussion as well. It's to focus, isolate, concentrate on that area. Steve, innovation is an individual thing. It's not a corporate thing. It's not a team thing. Innovation is an individual, that sparks that innovative kind of spirit, and then people start moving with it and so forth. And I agree with you completely. I mean, when you look at it, Steve Jobs was one of those people that could actually very well take off the Steve Jobs CEO hat, put on the customer hat, look at his product, and say, man, if I was a customer, I wouldn't buy this, or I would. And that was what innovation came from. Being able to look at it from the customer's perspective. I mean, actually being a customer. Then when you go into the CEO hat, which Jobs, like you said, let's see, here's one channel of income. Oh, that means if I multiply it by 4, I can get 4 times more income. Well, that's a pure mathematical way of looking at it, but it's not a humanistic way of looking at it.
Absolutely.
Now I come to the customers like, wait, iPhone used to be easy. There was an X and a plus, and now there's X plus, this, that, and everything else. And when am I scratching my head? Well, you just drop the expectation of your customer.
So when you drop the expectation, what happens to the word of innovation?
It stops. It completely stops.
What happens to the brand itself?
It gets diluted. It starts to get polluted with all sorts of other opinions and so forth. I have a way of saying this, and the best way I think is this. The difference between art and business. Simple. It's one word, efficiency. If you're looking at something being efficient, it's business. If you're looking at something that has nothing to do with efficiency, and it has everything to do with its aesthetics, its value, it's everything to touch the end, whoever it's intended for, that's art. And you spend a lifetime creating something and one thing, that's art. You can't call it business. Yeah. But the moment you want to apply that to a kind of scale, a reproduction and so forth, and bring it out on the market, you have to be efficient. So it's a natural, very tender, delicate line you have to walk between being efficient for money purposes, but if still want to be that artistic carrying, which Steve Jobs did well with iPhone, still having its design, its present, and everything like that, that was an art.
Very true. I think the perfect example is Google and Apple.
And that's a very good point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's exactly it. Google never played art.
Never played art, and never will, because the positioning is providing information.
Exactly.
But again, efficiency plays great with Google because Google is a product brand. Apple is a story brand. So there's a lot of art, there's a lot of emotions on Apple to lure the customers in. On the Google side, it's all about being rational.
Right.
Solving a problem. You have information problem, it's Google that provides it.
Sure, exactly.
It also enables, not only provides information, enables.
And it's neutral. Its neutrality is one of its most powerful points in being able to give what the end customer is expecting every time. But when you look at, for example, Apple was always about a line of difference. Drawing the line between mainstream like PC user and that Mac user. The difference, the style, the engineering or this. That was always about a design function. Now, the moment you go into efficiency or the moment you try to go into scale, you're going to lose that. And if you lose that, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, there's a certain trend that's flying all over the Middle East and Europe and everywhere. It's started by Amazon, which is e-commerce. Now, everyone is replicating the Amazon model. Clearly, there's no point of differentiation. Amazon is Amazon. Amazon does not have a competition. Right to the butt. Doesn't have any competition. Amazon sells everything. So I'm going to go and launch another e-commerce and sell everything what Amazon stores. Amazon, globally, pretty much weak in the Far East, strong in America. Now, what they did is they bought into platforms that already exist, like they bought Suit.com in the Middle East. So we are seeing a clutter. And we're seeing whenever a product has its own attributes and values in the traditional brick and mortar, and then once it goes online, it gets commoditized. Because the point of difference online is one thing, price.
Sure.
price.
That's it.
Absolute. And the journey online is not one day that you're gonna buy it and feel it and change it and put it on and return it. No, it's about 21 to 25 days journey for the customer. And if you cannot attain that 25 days journey for the customer, you're in the wrong business as e-commerce.
Absolutely, and I'd like to add one thing, and that it is price. I absolutely agree with you. And something that a lot of people aren't noticing, but it's also online reputation management.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I'm an avid buyer. I've used a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, okay, I look at the price, and then I look at the reviews. And then I try to kind of establish as a customer, if I would write that review, if it's biased, if it's not biased, if it's real or it's not. So here's something that's, you know, $10. Here's the exact same item for $8. Maybe a different brand or manufacturer might be changed, whatever the case is. But you look at the reviews and you see this kind of, you know, it wasn't what I expected. And you look at the other side with the $10 one, just a $2 marginal difference, big deal, you're gonna say, but it seems more confident, more strong.
Yes.
You will make that decision to buy the 10 over the 8. At that point, it's not about price, but still, it's still about price to be able to make the comparison or the differentiation.
Yes.
You know, so you need that. And again, back to Amazon and all the various different types of e-commerce sites, it shouldn't be global, it should be niche.
Absolutely agree. Commoditization era.
Yeah, I mean, let me say, if I'm gonna make an e-commerce site, I'm gonna make it for, you know, newly, you know, executives who their first year in a company and they're looking to go up. That's like a niche market, you know, that, so I'm a person, I just started a new job, I'm an executive and I wanna shoot up. So here's this website I go into and it's everything I need, from a pen to maybe a jacket, that's all geared for a very specific purpose. As you said, the clutter starts getting more. And then those people who are trying to enter that realm of internet buying or e-commerce, they start to get offended. They get like, oh, it's too much and it's an overload, and they pull out. And that's loss of the industry. That's, I mean, loss of trust in the industry, which is gonna overall affect everyone.
How much do you think inferiority complex plays a role when I have to replicate something that is successful? So I see Amazon, I replicate Amazon model, and I'm betting that my price is going to be less than Amazon, which is almost impossible. But I replicate it, but then I go and say, okay, I'm a local brand, Amazon is international, and then I push.
Means nothing.
Means nothing.
Means nothing. And I think that the more you do that, the more you kind of find yourself more inferiority complex, because you find yourself more and more less innovative. I mean, this is a stretch where, again, people are just trying to copycat, you know, replicate somebody else's success. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're putting something on it, adding the value to it.
True.
Take it, see from it, learn from it, and then put your own 2 cents worth in.
Yeah. But also, yes, people are driven by data, okay? We are data sheep. There's so much data, but very little insight. So how do you create point of difference when you have so much data and little insight?
Well, first of all, I mean, that's the biggest thing I myself as a consumer psychologist have noticed. In the end, they can all be manipulated to present whatever you want. Data is kind of like raw clay. I mean, people say data's the data, there's data. But yeah, it can be used to interpret and justify at various different points. I could say that the general life expectancy of people is increasing. The data is there, you know, from the very beginning of time to now. We see that, you know, people are longevity from 40 to 80. And then I could argue that the quality of life sucks because now that we live longer,
Absolutely.
we have nothing to do.
Yes.
So the outcome of what I want, I can manipulate the data to try to present whatever it is. So here it is. Everyone wants the data, but what is that data going to be used for?
So how do you analyze those data?
What do you want to analyze it for to get to that insight? You got to do a little bit of reverse engineering here. You got to find out what your argument is, where you want to go, and then work backwards to get the data. And too often, people are taking the data and from that making an assessment and then making the end result. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be correct.
Yeah.
You know, it can be interpreted in many different ways. So make sure that you understand first where you want to take this. If I want to show that life expectancy is getting better and better and that we're living longer, that's the beginning. Then I go backwards to find that data to support it.